Lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag one nation, under God,
liberty and justice.
Thank you. Let the record show that 5 members of the board are present, and only Mr. Saylor is missing. Any changes to the agenda that the board wishes to entertain? The agenda?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Public comment on hearing on.
The amplification is not hearing very well.
Your microphone.
You don't even know what part you didn't hear, do you? When we reach item 6, we'll take public comment after staff gives their presentation, and after the board has an opportunity to ask questions, then we'll invite public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the board. So are there any public comments regarding items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda, item number 4.
Move to approve consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Consent agenda passes unanimously. We're to item 5, considering the budget for fiscal year 11 and 12. Eric?
Yes, at our last board meeting on April 21st, we presented to you a draft budget, and the intent was for you to be able to review it until this point in time. And we also distributed a detailed breakdown of those costs as was requested. During that intervening 6 to 7 weeks since our last meeting, obviously work has continued and we progressed on the project, but we identified additional things that needed to be done. And I've put before you a memo identifying the additional items which would be required in the new fiscal year. And that increases the budget considerably by about $1 million. I'd like to highlight several of the items that really constitute the majority of those costs. One is the work that obviously in the 6 to 7 weeks, we have a better idea what is going to be accomplished or what has been accomplished since our last board meeting. And the work that we thought would be accomplished this fiscal year through West Yost is not being completed. There's considerable work, and that's going to be deferred into the next fiscal year. Hence, the monies, $373,000, won't be spent, so that's a reduction to what we'd be spending in the current fiscal year. However, since we're keeping each fiscal year separately, it would be an additional amount of money that would be spent in the new fiscal year, but the net effect to the agency would be zero in monetary terms, if you will. Another additional item is land acquisition. Given our situation relative to the water treatment plant, what we see in terms of right-of-way acquisition, and what we see in terms of the possibility of acquiring land for the Plan B intake site, it was felt that we really needed to have that additional monies in case some of these eventualities occurred relative to those property acquisitions. And then the other larger item is associated with additional work that West Yost would be undertaking, and that's asterisked on that sheet that you have, which shows the numerous activities. A lot of it is associated with looking at the additional water supply, supplemental water supply. The aquifer storage and recovery, for instance, would be part of that amount of money, and it includes both groundwater monitoring as well as wastewater monitoring. And each city has requested some additional services through the regional agency. And those costs would be, that are specific for each city, would be allocated directly to those cities. It would not be a cost borne by the regional agency, but be assigned to each city. So those are the larger dollar amounts. If you have any, obviously, if you have any questions, we'd be glad to answer those, and Jim Yost is here as well to amplify on any of those changes.
All right. Anything else you want to say about regarding the budget?
No, it's really pretty much, pretty much. That's, like I indicated, we recognize it's a considerable addition. But what we presented to you before in a formal presentation at our last board meeting, where we went into a lot of depth, is pretty much stays the same in terms of the various categories of work and what we want to accomplish. It's just more money, which is a big deal. We understand that.
Questions? Marty?
Thank you. Well, just a couple of quick questions. The agency treasury budget is increased. Is that because of more hours or increased salary?
Well, I know Paul is kicking and screaming about about us giving him more money. Part of it's for auditing. We didn't have enough money in there for auditors' costs, but another amount, we think the auditors' cost is between $5,000 and $10,000. But the additional amount would be because we feel we're moving into a new methodology. It's not a big deal, but we're moving into a new tracking of costs, and particularly splitting of costs between the cities, and we just want to make sure it's comfortable for that aspect of the budget.
Okay. And then what is the Davis treated water pipeline gap analysis?
The
Davis treated water pipeline gap analysis.
I'm going to ask Jim to answer that, the gap analysis.
As you may recall, some of the work is being done as part of the regional facilities, and some of the work is being done as part of local facilities. The evaluation of the local facilities in the city of Davis had not extended out quite far enough to tie into the regional facilities, and so we've added that.
Oh, okay.
So that we cover that in this next fiscal year.
Okay. Thank you. That was it.
Any other questions from members of the board?
Well, Eric, I'm sorry, maybe I missed it here, but on the third bullet down on the note that we have before us just today is this additional West Yost tasks for 438, and I think you were just going through that, but I really didn't track on it. Then where does that show up on this new Exhibit A? Or?
On the spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Well, I wish I had given you, do we have extra copies of that colored breakdown?
I have this big sheet here.
He wants to know the breakdown by individual tasks, where they occur on the spreadsheet. We have this.
We've got some monitoring programs.
We were just talking about nearly $500,000 being added
there's
into the
one on
budget.
Can you highlight some of these?
Sure, I can.
There's the groundwater and
Here's the
wastewater
breakdown, Jim.
quality monitoring program.
So the green or
So
the blue?
they're on Exhibit A.
Yeah, they're individually
Yes.
entered.
Everything's included right on that spreadsheet.
I just can't quite tell which things on this spreadsheet are changes and which things are in the budget that we saw at the last meeting, right?
So let me hit first the new tasks that have been added, and I don't know how they appear on your spreadsheet. On mine, they're in green. I don't think yours have colors.
They don't have the colorized version.
Underneath general facilities, there's a distribution system water quality expert panel, basically convening a group to evaluate corrosion that would result in the two water supply systems. So this is on the very first page. Look at engineering as a second major head, and then under that, under general facilities, you see distribution system.
Fluoridation, groundwater,
Water quality
wastewater
expert
quality
panel.
monitoring.
That task was added. Fluoridation addition analysis, that task was added. And groundwater and wastewater quality monitoring program, that task was added. And that's a cost primarily for the city of Woodland.
The $73,000 for the groundwater and wastewater quality monitoring program?
Yes, what we're doing, you may recall, we're doing this modeling of the water supply and demands in the future based on probability that things are going to occur. It's based on selenium concentrations in the city of Woodland. They don't have a good handle on those concentrations, and so they want to do some additional monitoring of selenium in their water and wastewater system so we can nail down precisely what they're going to have to do to comply with the reg. So that's primarily what that's for. A little bit of work under, keep going down a little further under WDCWA permit engineering technical support. Facilities permitting engineering support got raised a little bit. We transferred work from now into the next fiscal year under the intake design on joint intake 30% agency design and review, because that work won't actually be done until August and September of next year. So there's 97,000 additional that was added in there, transferred out of this year, as I said. There's joint intake 100% agency civil design that was actually reduced by $27,000. Raw pipeline technical services, regional water treatment facility technical services, and Davis treated water pipeline technical services were increased. And what that really amounts to is transferring again work from this year to next year. We added additional budget under, if you go down under DBO procurement where it says request for proposals, we added additional budget there because there's work that's actually going to be done next year, that part of which we thought was going to be done this year. And the same with review and screen proposals. That's gone up. On the second page, if you go to DBO procurement under legal, we have contract procurement construction council. That was increased by $18,000.
Which one was that again? That was,
That was the first line under DBO procurement.
And that was an adjustment that for direct charges, other direct charges other than labor, that were
It's
not
not on the
added
second
in the
page,
first
it's on
time
the first
through.
page. It's on our first page.
Yours is laid out a little differently than mine.
on page 1.
oh, I see.
Council, construction council.
And that was for costs that were identified, but were inadvertently left off for other direct charges.
So that's under legal, DBO procurement, and then what line item was it?
It's the first one, isn't it?
The first
Construction
one?
council?
Okay, now I understand you're on the second page, and we're under general legal services. And we have a task that was added just very recently under that, which is entitled Plan B condemnation. It's an optional task. Budget was added in that task. Under land acquisition and permit fees, additional budget was added to land and easement surveys and legal descriptions, condemnation assistance, Plan D condemnation assistance, regional water treatment facility site agency purchase, and Plan B intake site and pipeline easement appraisal fee reimbursement. Those were all increased slightly, primarily because of work being moved from last year to this year, to this next year. Under, following down on that same list, you get down to Plan B intake site and pipeline easement purchase. That was added. That was not on the April budget. Raw water pipeline easements purchase.
I'm sorry, hold on. Yeah, there's no entries there. We've got Plan B intake site, exactly, Marty. Plan B intake site and pipeline easement appraisal fee reimbursement. There's no dollar figures there.
It's the one right below that. Oh, okay. Okay. For obvious reasons, it doesn't show the actual numbers there. Then you've got raw water pipeline easements purchased, Davis treated water pipeline easements purchased, Woodland treated water pipeline easement purchase. All three of those were reduced. The total reduction there is around 50,000. Agency treasurer, as
But
we've already,
I'm not tracking on why there's no numbers there.
because we don't want to show the folks that we will be negotiating with what the numbers are, Joe.
Oh, okay,
That's the basic reason.
all right. Well, they're probably not in the room anyway, but, okay, all right, okay.
We can watch the tape.
You may recall, we did this last year with the budget also. We had asterisks.
I'm a newbie.
Now, if you get under agency administration, as we've talked about already, agency treasurer was increased by 15,000. And then the net effect of increasing the budget costs and taking 5% contingency increased the bottom line, which is the contingency number for fiscal year 11-12 by $51,000.
Okay.
Question about one of the tasks.
So these were all in our packet.
Yes. Yeah, the new
I mean,
budget, the bottom line
what was
is-
in our packet has not changed from this larger spreadsheet that you.
What was in your packet that hasn't changed? Well, that'd be another list.
Spreadsheet is the same. It's
The
just a larger
spreadsheet
version.
is the same. The only thing that's changed on the new spreadsheet that was handed out to you today is the shaded areas. They were mislabeled previously in the draft that was in your packet that was sent out to you.
Okay.
The numbers remain the same. It's just the items were mislabeled. And so the one in the shaded is correct.
But after I studied this with my magnifying glass, I came to the same bottom line number.
It's exactly
As
the
what-
same bottom
as-
line number.
as what these
correct, that you had in your
changes, yeah.
packet from, that was
Okay.
distributed last week.
Yeah, but see, if you had it on the iPad or on a computer, you could make the screen
Yeah.
bigger. though.
Well, I had this nifty little thing I used to.
I have a, Bill, I have
This
a-
This is the delta, your memo, Eric, that we have here in front of us today, which is fresh today, is just explaining the delta between the April 21 budget and
Right.
and the budget that's in the packet.
I was remiss in not
see.
including that in the staff report, and I wanted to make sure you knew that these
Okay.
changes had taken place.
All right, that's helpful, and Jim, I appreciate you going through it.
I have a specific question, Bill, about one of the line items and one that we've actually gotten some communication on.
Okay.
And it's the fluoridation addition analysis. And this has been requested by the cities. What exactly in that analysis is going to be done for that $28,000?
Primary objective for that analysis is to determine what the water agency would have to do if the two cities decide they want fluoridation of their water supply. So the objective is to define the equipment and the costs that the water agency would experience in this project if that request is made by the two cities.
Is that in addition to the analysis that's already being done to do it as a one-system addition? Because initially, weren't we not, within the design and in the engineering, going to engineer one injector, one building versus
Oh,
an
yes,
analysis
we
of
still
two?
intend to have the equipment at the water treatment plant. Again, it will depend on the decision by each of the two cities. If one city says we want to fluoridate and the other one says we don't, then, obviously the equipment would be just directed toward the one city. But the idea is we would put the equipment at the water treatment plant and inject fluoride if the cities decide that's what they want to do. So this is to define the cost to do that.
And we never had that in as a budgeted item in I can understand separating, but we never had as a budgeted item an analysis of what the cost would be for just one system. We never anticipated potential fluoridation?
No, we did not.
Okay.
So while we're on this, I want to make sure that there's clarity, and I think I understand it, but I may not. So, and I think these are questions for our chair, but Eric can jump in as well, and Jim, don't go anywhere, because you may be pegged as well. But the decision to fluoridate water will not be made by this board, correct?
Right.
Right. The decision to fluoridate or not to fluoridate will be made by each city. Is that correct? Right. And what's happening here in this small budget line item is simply the water agency being able to do some work so that if the cities ask the question, what will it cost, what will it take, is it feasible, is it not feasible, et cetera, this board will be able to provide some response instead of saying, no idea, didn't study that, didn't look into it, didn't cost it, didn't do anything, right? So we're just doing our kind of due diligence on the engineering side to be able to respond to questions that may or may not come from one or both of the communities. I mean, is that your understanding, Bill and Eric? Yeah. And I think that I want to make sure that then is understood by everybody. And I think that is a responsible action by this group to do, that work so that we can be responsive. But this is not the body that will make any decision about fluoridation.
Well, within that analysis, I would hope that the costs will be broken down in the two categories, whether we do it as a one system in case both cities decide, and whether we do it as two systems if one city decides not to at this time and the other decides to do it at this time.
Yep. Greg. Yeah, Greg.
Greg?
Yeah, Vice Chair Souza, in response to your question, while we've never priced it out, it's always been part of the design concept that we would have that. And I would believe that in that design concept, we would always have 2 points of injection, one for each city, simply because of the different requirements that the water would have for the different cities. And so the design concept that had been intended to be included would be an injection point beyond the Y, where the waters are split. So we've had the design out there. Now what we're doing is saying, well, exactly what is going to be entailed if there's a cost involved with that. So it's not like it hasn't been discussed before, it's just now we're looking at the costs.
That's what I thought.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be impossible to answer all of the public questions about this, so I'd like us to put it up on our website to clarify this point, that we are not studying what the level of fluoridation should be or whether it should or should not happen. All we're doing is the engineering work to see what it would cost if it did happen.
Yeah, and I think the very preliminary engineering work at that. I mean, it's just kind of the basic bare bones kinds of stuff, because if communities want to go forward, then they've got their system that they would be bringing with all their issues, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is going to come to councils anyway, so it'll be a point in the future at which any of those decisions will be made.
Understood. I would like us to clarify this board's position,
Okay.
what we can and cannot do. Because apparently there's a feeling out there that we actually have some control over this. We really don't.
Okay, we can look at that.
You can take public comment on this. Yeah.
On, no, it's item 6.
Well, but on this item.
Yes,
yeah,
I
yeah.
will. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the board? I have one question, and that is in regards to our long-term projections that we've previously done. With these changes in the budget, how much did our long-term budget increase?
The long-term budget, well, I know this fiscal year. I don't know if...
I know you've got a fiscal year increase,
Yeah,
but long-term, what did this do to our long-term budget?
I think it's basically a wash. What we're doing is just moving work around at different times or acquiring property at different times. So the net effect on the long-term budget is probably a wash.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes.
The one comment to that is that cash flow becomes the issue when we move this around.
Understood.
Is trying to be prepared ahead of time for this coming.
Understood. And I didn't hear any comments from either of the cities, so I expect that you've digested this and you're comfortable with it. Paul?
Yeah, Chairperson Murphy, if I could just make a quick comment to that effect. I think, we continue to endeavor to ensure that the most current planning, both funding and cash flow from the JPA, is coordinated with the work underway at the two cities that are also in the process of finalizing budgets, various stages of kind of rate analysis and cash flow management. And so there are two things. There's some of the increase that we discussed here is actually just money that was actually expected to be spent this year, and so that money's already been collected and budgeted. The component that does represent an increment, we're going to ensure that as the two cities finalize their budgets, that we're in sync with the JPA's requirements. And I would also highlight something that we mentioned back in April, and we have worked with both cities on this, and that's the timing of the payments relative to cash flow. Up until this point, we've done essentially quarterly disbursements to support the JPA, but because and I appreciate the cash flow analysis that the staff has done suggests that some of these costs may be front-loaded. Both cities are aware that I believe we're going to plan on about 35% of the payment in the first quarter, and then 25% payments, and then kind of a cleanup at the end, just to make sure that the funds available to the JPA and our small reserve stays intact.
Okay. Very good. Yes, Vice Chair Souza.
A second question I have about an item in the budget has to do with land acquisition. If I gather, since the $252,000 in your letter doesn't match up to any number in the budget, is that number the figure that we're anticipating would be spent on all of the easement acquisitions where there isn't a specific dollar amount put on that line?
Right, that money is what we anticipate an eventuality that could occur. There's not a guarantee it's going to occur, but we
Right.
think it may occur, and it depends on which way we go relative and how successful we are in proceeding ahead with the joint intake to some extent. But it also involves issues associated with the water treatment plant side as well, some of the right-of-way acquisition. So it's a combination of all of that.
So on top,
It
so
could be as much as that.
could be up to that amount,
Yeah.
depending on what we negotiate.
Correct.
So it could be, as a maximum, additional 252 on top of the bottom line total that we
Right.
have for the year.
Of what we had already budgeted,
Okay,
right?
great, thank you.
Okay, do we have any public comment on this item? I have no cards in front of me. Yes, ma'am? Just like to have you state your name and where you're from, and
Sorry, I didn't know you did cards. I'm Barbara King. I live in Davis. You may have had time to read the email I sent you about the budget item, the part about 4.6.7, analysis of fluoride action, which is page 52 of your 56 pages, also known as page 18 of the West Jost Associates. How's that for cross-referencing? I do get it that you're not deciding to fluoridate or not fluoridate the water here, but the budget item bothered me a little bit. I wanted you to add some stuff and take out some stuff. Now, given that the CDC now says it's not a good idea to use fluoridated water to mix infant formula, and that you shouldn't be taking, you never should have been taking the tablets at the same time you have fluoridated water. If I understand it correctly, we're going to have, if this all comes to fruition, we'll have river water a lot of the time, well water some of the time, and maybe a mixture. Am I correct?
this is public comment, not question and answer.
Okay. If I am correct in that, then you're going to have some serious communication tasks to complete when you switch back and forth between the possibly fluoridated river water and the probably not fluoridated well water and a mixture of the two. For people who want to know, well, gee, should I be using the water from my tap to mix baby formula? Or should I keep giving my kid the fluoride tablets or not? So if we do have the switching back and forth, that is going to be a communication nightmare. So I would ask you to put in the analysis the costs and methods of disseminating information about not using it to mix fluoridated water to mix baby formula, the costs and methods of providing non-fluoridated bottled water to infants' parents who can't afford it. The costs and methods of notifying people when we switch between, I've already said that. And the costs and methods of notifying any people who will get no surface water that is not fluoridated. Because that could be an issue for people who would like to give the tablets otherwise. The other thing I'd like to be sure happens is that you look at, when you're costing it, that you look at all 3 fluoride compounds. Most places are using the hexafluorosilicic acid or the sodium hexafluorosilate. Originally, we were using the sodium fluoride, which, as a side note, is the only thing that has FDA approval, but you don't need that to put it in the water. So it's more expensive, it's used less, but it's got better studies behind it for safety. I would like to be sure that this cost analysis includes that one. It might get overlooked because it's only used by about 10% of systems, and it costs more. But it has its benefits, too. And then I'll just read this last paragraph. I also strongly urge you not to use any of Davis's 13,000 part of the fluoridation analysis to pay for an analysis of the benefits and constraints of water fluoridation. The minute you step into benefits, you're talking medical stuff, I think. The same paragraph in your own document says it is each individual city's decision to fluoridate or not. The assessment of any benefits and risks to fluoridation is a big part of such a decision, and that includes the choice of whose advice to seek and whom, if ever, to pay in making this decision. Please don't spend Davis's limited funds on a task that belongs to Davis. I think you're kind of sticking your toe in an area that you're trying not to by how this part of this is written. That's it.
Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate your comments.
Oh, I appreciate your patience.
All right. Back to the board then. Do we have a motion on the budget?
Sorry. Move approval.
Second.
Any comment?
Actually, I would just like to clarify off of the public comment. I mean, this is engineering only that's in this budget here. This is not going to be used for, anything that would come after a decision or part of a decision by a city to go forward or not.
Correct. It's to look at the engineering aspects to provide fluoride.
Right. So I would just ask staff if there's, any sentence in our budget here in this language that hints at these funds being used for anything other than the kind of the baseline engineering, information that the cities may want to have when they go forward, considering the types of issues that Barbara has raised here. These funds are not for those purposes. That will be on the cities to do that.
Okay.
So, good. What's added, how it's added, when it's added, what the public information is, that's all separate than what we're talking about here.
Yes, and we'd certainly take a look at that scope before that's finalized, and I'm sure that we don't have those types of words in there.
Yeah.
Other than strictly the engineering aspects of it, of providing those facilities.
Right. Good. Okay. I have nothing further.
But as we've stated previously, we would certainly hope the two cities would cooperate in cost savings measures regarding those type of analyses.
Yeah, I think they would have to ask this agency, or they'd coordinate outside this agency on that. Yeah. Good.
All right, we have a motion. Sid?
Just one, this is actually one of the other items, but it's the West Jost contract. And the language in there for subtask 4.6.7 says, documentation of the benefits and constraints of fluoridation and relating these to the supply conditions, including definition of the likely fluoridation injection rate. So that's a little bit different than engineering, I think, the way you're talking about it, Joe?
Yeah, it really is. We need to
we
clarify
consider
that.
engineering from an engineering standpoint when you look at life cycle costs. So you're looking at both the capital costs and you're looking at operation. What does it take to operate the system? So that's all got to be taken into account, I'm sure, by each of the cities in factoring it into whatever decision is made, is not only what are the capital costs, but what does it really cost to run this system given the individual characteristics of each city in terms of their distribution system. I consider that personally engineering, so that's what I had meant.
So the costs and the benefits are within the scope of engineering. They're not
health.
Not health, right? And I think that's,
Exactly.
so that's, I guess that's where I would ask that we
Maybe
tweak that language
Yeah.
to make sure that there's, perfect clarity, more than just,
And that's a good
Clarity,
point. That's a
yeah.
good point.
That's a
Just
good point.
Defining
Sid, thank you.
yeah, thank you,
hard
Sid.
facilities versus actual operations.
Okay. And Jim, that's what you intended, correct? By that statement. All right. Very good. We have a motion then on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll now move to item 6. Nobody wants to take ownership for item 6, huh? Did we have a metal detector before we came in the room tonight? Okay.
Sorry about that. Also, on item 6, a very key item to keep our program moving forward in terms of narrowing down to a short list of 3 our DBO teams that would receive a request for proposal. And I'd like to have the presentation made by the chairman of our Facilities Procurement Committee, which is Jerry Gilbert, who will go through the steps that were taken in the resulting recommendation to you to approve moving forward with the recommended 3 firms.
Thank you, and Mr. Gilbert, welcome, and carry on.
Chair Marble, members of the board, I'm pleased to be able to make the first recommendation of the major milestone on the project. You may recall the diagram that's shown over there. We had it in an earlier presentation. This is at the end of the second box and reflects work that has been done by the team, as well as a series of 5 groups of companies that have come together to propose qualifications on the project. So we're recommending that first star you see in the diagram there as the first major step forward in developing the project. The Facilities Procurement Committee, our members are shown on the next slide, and you're all familiar with them. But they were supported by a whole group of technical experts in each of the areas that were critical to evaluating the qualifications of the teams. And I'd like to go through the activities we've done. It's maybe a little redundant, but let's do that quickly and then concentrate on the evaluation that we conducted. We've had, over the last 18 months, numerous briefings with agencies, contractors, and experts on the DBO process prior to your decision. We had individual meetings with the teams that desired them, and we issued a request for qualifications in January of 2011. We had a great deal of response. The workshop was attended by 50 people after we had issued the RFQ. We had written questions and clarification. There were a number of them, but there's one I want to point out, and that is that we had started out this description of the project requiring a single company to guarantee the performance of the entire contract. After a number of requests and evaluation by our financial experts and legal experts, we concluded that a successor guarantor structure, namely shifting the guarantee from the first phase of the project, which would be the design build phase, after completion and testing of the project, shift the guarantee, the financial guarantee, to a successor guarantor, the operator, was a reasonable thing to do and would benefit the agency. So we've allowed that as part of the description of the project. We received 5 qualifications packages on April the 15th, and the teams are shown on the next slide. It's a little small to read there, but you all have the printed docs, and you can see the sterling group of contractors and subcontractors that were interested in building this project. Let's go to the next, yeah, right. Here are a couple of things I want to point out in the process that we went through to conclude which were the most qualified or better qualified firms. And I want to emphasize here and maybe later on that the important thing that we felt all the way through this and is inherent in the recommendation is the relative differences between firms. It isn't that there aren't lots of capable firms here, it's the relative differences between the teams that resulted in the three that we are recommending. We had, during the course, as you always do in these processes, some technical compliance issues, something maybe perhaps wasn't signed right and so forth. We've clarified all of those, and we've now had advice from council that all of the 5 submittals are technically in compliance with the specification as well as meeting the descriptive needs that we asked for. We made phone calls to key references that the firms listed, particularly with regard to operations, and I'll get to that. But we also made calls to independent references that we, based on the professional experience of the team or heard of, to be sure that we adequately tested the qualifications. And we also independently assessed each individual area where we felt it was critical, and I'll talk some more about that in a minute. This was the rule of thumb that individual members of the FPC used in arriving at the recommendation that's before you. We did not go through a mathematical calculation. This was a consensus process in evaluating the quals for each of the functional performance areas that I'll talk about in a minute. So let's do that next, and I'll go through each of the areas of qualifications. The first, next, the first is the team. We looked at the team competence working together, as well as the individual members of the team's competence in the area of DBO. And finally, we looked at the individuals who were proposed to lead the effort and what their capability was. And after looking at all of that, we concluded that 3 teams were better qualified. Not that the other teams were not qualified, just that the 3 teams were better qualified to, as a team, to lead this effort. The second area of expertise we looked at was design. We have some of the strongest design experience that in all 5 proposals, but we felt that the 4 of the 5 had stronger design competence, and they're indicated on this graphic. The next area was permitting. It really was considered along with design because it occurs primarily during that phase, but we listed here separately because there were some differences between the firms, and 3 of the firms were stronger in the permitting area than 2 of the others. And the next area we looked at was construction, and we had people who were quite experienced at construction management make inquiries regarding the construction firms' qualifications. And in this area, we again had very strong firms. The separating area was perhaps those firms who had had less experience in water projects as opposed to, let's say, wastewater or other types of DBO projects. And we gave weight to that. Finally, the operations and maintenance area is a critical area. All of the FPC members felt that. And in this area, there are 3 firms that stand out as better qualified in both size and the number of water projects they operate compared to the others. Finally, we looked at evaluation that was conducted by subcontractor Raftstellis under the direction of Harold Smith, their principal, and they believed that all of these firms had adequate financial strength with either a successor or a single guarantor to conduct this work and assure the agency that the performance will be achieved. So in summary, on the next slide, it's not exactly in order here, but you can see that 3 of the respondents were better qualified in the team and individual experience. In design, 4 were better. In construction, 4 were better. In the operations, 3 firms are better qualified. And I'd like to mention, too, I didn't before, that Carl Stinson was our operations consultant. A lot of the folks in our team have had operations experience with water facilities, particularly Trussell's, our principal water quality subconsultant. But Carl Stinson, who was an operations leader for the Alameda County Water District and East Bay Mud previously, was a participant in that effort. We felt that 3 firms were better qualified, and finally just the summary that all 5 firms were adequately qualified from financial reasons. This is just a graphic of the material that you have received, and when we get down to it, the next slide shows that the 3 better qualified shortlist firms listed alphabetically because we didn't distinguish between them in terms of relative qualifications were CDM, CH2M Hill, and Veolia teams. We listed here Balfour Beatty and Aquacal as qualified and less qualified respectively. And finally, I'd just like to say our next steps are, and we have been underway with the RFP work. We're a 3rd major team meeting on that, and the members of the FPC also participate in that effort, developing all the documentation to solicit the proposals from these 3 firms. The agency authorization to, well, it says here to issue the RFP will be asked in June the 30th. We're asking you today to approve the short list that's recommended by the FPC, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Let's take questions from the board. We'll bring it back for comments later, but let's see if there's any questions at this point. Okay, seeing none, we'll engage in public comment. Appreciate if you'd keep your comments to 3 minutes. Maurice Reed. I assume this was item 6? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Maurice Reed. I'm here representing the local Building Trades Council for Sacramento and Yolo counties. We have over 20,000 highly qualified construction workers that work here in this area. And you might be interested to know that over 30% of them are currently unemployed, and we think this is one fantastic project. We agree with your top 3, your short list that you have. We would only like to urge you, in the process of choosing the final, that you take a close look at local hire and that you get the best qualified local people to work, and that there are opportunities for apprentices. And you'll be hearing more from us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Good.
Ray Groom.
Ray Groom, City of Woodland. I'm here representing Yolo County Health Council, but I'm also representing, I'm speaking for myself. Some of you know me from other lifetimes. I've built or stewarded about $1 billion in construction projects in my limited career, and many of them in Northern California. UC Davis, Travis, the large hospital at Travis. And for Yolo County, libraries, including library in Davis, I'd like to commend the process. The process has been spectacular. This design, build, and operate process is so efficient. You see it used, you don't see it used often, because we in government, I'm not in government anymore, but you in government tend to want to protect yourselves, and having, you want to control every step along the way. And so there's some inherent risk to doing it this way, but there's also some extremely good savings. You couldn't build it at probably a better time than this. I agree with the gentleman from the union. This is a great time to bid. I know when we bid the library in Winters, we had a little over $5.5 million estimate. It came in at 3.2. This is the time to get out there as soon as we can. I also commend you because this will help us avoid some, I believe eventually we're going to be cited by the water boards, the state water board, Clean Water Act, because if we don't do something about our water, our sewer plants are at risk, and then we're going to have to do some upgrading there to deal with this. As a user of water in Woodland, and I don't drink any bottled water, I drink out of my tap. Unfortunately, I am one of the bad boys because I have a water softener in my house to keep my fixtures from clogging up. But I would like to get away from using that water softener. It adds salt to my diet, which I would really prefer not to have. But more important is I'm putting down hundreds of salt into this gentleman's sewer plant, which couldn't be any worse. And I'm not alone. There are thousands of people in both of our communities that are doing the same things. And so this project will solve a lot of that problem. In fact, it will solve that problem. I would like to transition, though, to your scope of work for consultant services. It's this is, I believe, for West Yost, the consultant. The analysis of fluoride action, we talked about that a few minutes ago. It's been spoken of today. There's no timeline on when we're going to get that information, and I would think the city councils need to make that decision sooner than later, or at least get the information to get that information so that the councils can review it and get public comment and figure out what we're going to do. I can't tell you that in the city of Woodland, since I'm here speaking for Woodland, 35% of the K through 6 children have untreated dental disease. And this, we believe fluoride, and in fact we know, the studies show fluoride can reduce that significantly. And those are not the people who can afford to take fluoride tablets. Those are people who cannot. The underserved will benefit from this much more than those that are that have a lot of choices, who can afford to go to their local dentist whenever they choose to.
Ray, I got to ask you to wrap it up.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. So, in summary, I'd like to see this group ask for a date specific when that information will be made available to our city councils, so that action can be taken.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fabersuni. Am I close?
You're close. Yeah. Mikos Fabersoon. I'm a resident of the City of Davis, and I'm joined by two colleagues of mine who are also City of Davis residents, Mike Patch and Mary Wind. And so I'm going to consolidate the 3 minutes each and hopefully finish before the 9 minutes is up. I noted on the criteria that is being used for selection of the contractor in this case, that the criteria did not include ethical considerations. And so I'm here today to really address that oversight or different perspective. As residents of the City of Davis, we want to ensure that companies with whom the city does business have corporate codes of ethics that serve as a guiding beacon for socially responsible behavior as corporate citizens, and that they follow such codes in their conduct of business. As we all know, in their quest for corporate profits, some corporations have turned a cold shoulder to the notions of global stewardship and have hurt the environment. Companies such as BP, who harmed the Gulf. Others, like Gap and Nike, in the past have contracted with businesses employing child labor at pennies per day sweatshops in violation of trade agreements and international law. Contracting with firms that are actively complicit in human rights violations or environmental damage would dishonor the city and this agency and violate the ethics principles encompassed by the 9 statements of function and purpose of the Davis Human Relations Commission, the citizen commission that represents the conscience of our city government. From the first of these statements, I'm quoting, the Human Relations Commission promotes mutual respect, understanding, and tolerance amongst all persons, seeks to build a community where relationships among diverse peoples are valued by all, discrimination and hate are not tolerated. And I'll cut it short. Although this policy was written to assure that discriminatory practices are prevented and discouraged within the boundaries of the City of Davis, we think that we would all agree we want to assure that discriminatory practices are not in use by the contractors that the city and this agency employs. In this day and age, after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we would not want to contract with a company that, in its business elsewhere, serves a jurisdiction that discriminates on the basis of race or color. In following our policies to discourage discrimination, it is likely that we would support the enactment of sanctions intended to end such behavior, just as sanctions and boycotts and divestment were applied to South Africa until apartheid was abandoned as a national policy. We are here today to express...
You have 30 seconds, sir. Okay.
Okay. I think I was trying for 9 minutes. So we had 3 minutes apiece,
yeah,
isn't that correct?
If they want to chime in, that's fine, but your time is up in 10 seconds.
Let's hold the clock. I'm trying to clarify. Do I have 9 minutes or 3 minutes?
You have 10 seconds. You can pass it on.
You're not answering my question, sir. I asked you what the time allocation was.
I just answered your question. You have 10 seconds. Your time is up. Would you like to pass it on, please?
Then we'll go
we
on
appreciate
from
your
here.
comments, but we've got to move the meeting along.
Well, you're not allowing us 3 minutes apiece. That was the purpose of my question about how much time we had. My speech was 7 minutes, and that's
Each of you has 3 minutes, sir. If you'd like to pass it on, that's fine.
All right. We are here today to express concern about one such company that is being considered for selection as a final bidder for the design-build contract for the Sacramento River Conveyance Project. That company is Veolia Water North America, whose parent company, Veolia Environment, with headquarters in France, has over 330,000 employees worldwide in 4 divisions of operation: Veolia Transportation, Energy Services, Environmental Services, and Veolia Water, the division represented by the prospective bidder we are addressing here. And I'll let Mary go from there.
Veolia has a code of conduct available for download on its website titled Ethics, Commitment, and Responsibility. It leads with, as Veolia Environment develops its business activities in France and around the world, we strive to foster core values and principles that are upheld by all of our employees wherever we operate. We assume this applies to the chairman and CEO of the parent company, Mr. Henry Proglio, and those officers in each of its divisions, including its subsidiary Veolia Water North America. The company's guiding principles are defined in this document, including respecting all Veolia environmentals, contractual commitments, as well as all applicable laws or regulations. We assume this means international laws and treaties, and taking into account the needs and expectations of industrial and municipal customers, such as those in the city of Woodland and the city of Davis, and those of the beneficiaries of the services provided by Veolia and Environment. It goes on to stress the importance of protecting the quality of Veolia Environment's image and admonishes employees to abstain from any act that may damage the reputation of Veolia Environment. Veolia has even established an ethics committee to oversee the implementation of these principles. Veolia should be complimented for going this far, but it should be scolded for failure to implement those same policies in its operation in Israel. So what has Veolia done that brings us to stand before you today? Veolia supports the system of apartheid in the occupied West Bank by operating buses only for Jewish passengers on roads and that lead and restricted only to Jews, and will be doing so on a soon-to-be-opened light rail system connecting the city of Jerusalem with the Jewish-only settlements in the West Bank. As you are probably aware, settlements constructed for citizens of an occupying nation, Israel in this case, built on the occupied land, are illegal under international law in violation of the Fourth Geneva Conventions and by ruling of the International Criminal Court. Specifically, Veolia owns 80% of Connex Jerusalem, the company that will be operating the trains once the project becomes operational in 2 months, August 2011. Connex in Israel also operates regular bus services to Israel settlements in the West Bank, including Bet Horon and Givat Zeev. Along Road 443, which an apartheid road, Palestinians are not permitted to use the road, even though the road is within Palestinian territory. My husband will continue. Right there.
Continuing, through its subsidiary Veolia Environmental Services Israel, which has bought TMM Integrated Recycling Services, it owns and operates the Tovland landfill in the occupied Jordan Valley, using captured Palestinian land and natural resources for the needs of Israeli settlements. Given the complicity of Veolia in Israel's violation of international law, and by doing so Veolia's violation of its own code of conduct, and of the non-discrimination principles established by the Human Relations Commission, we request that the board disqualify Veolia from participating further in the bidding and the design construction process. Further, we request that the board of the Clean Water Agency advise the CEOs of both Veolia Environmental and Veolia Water North America of the reasons for Veolia Water's disqualification, and suggest to these companies that if they wish to conduct business with municipalities such as Davis and Woodland, that they should follow their codes of conduct and adhere to international law. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments.
And I just wanted to leave you one thing so you'll have it. This is Veolia's ethics document, ethics commitment and responsibility. I have only one copy, but I'll leave it with.
Thank you. If you'll leave that and leave a copy of your statement, that would be great.
I've got some corrections to it, so if it's all right with you, I'll just clean it up and email it in.
Thank you. Mike Pack? Oh, okay. And Mary? Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't know your names. All right. Jim Bundhill? Burchill. Okay. We'll give you a little leeway on your handwriting there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I apologize. I try to get names right.
I've been in Davis too long. My question basically is I'm interested in the RFP and the initial draft of the RFP. Are there going to be meetings on the RFP before the first draft is drafted?
This is comment time, and
well,
we'll make note of.
Deal with my question.
We'll make note of the question, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question. Good comment. Do we have any other public comment? Yes. If you just come up and state your name and where you're from, as long as you're comfortable doing that, that would be great.
My name is Dan Kokotis. I co-own Swift, Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Kia, and Davis. Probably considered a significant taxpayer and will be funding this project, I'm sure, for many years to come. My only comment today is, as a private business owner who has to regularly compete for government contracts, very familiar with the process, it came to my attention when I was reviewing the document that we have 4 qualified contractors, and I know one of the contractors has done significant work in this area in the Sacramento County area, and I would like to think that it would be in the best interest of the taxpayers to receive a competitive bid from this fourth contractor that's been deemed qualified. And no disrespect to the work done by the FPC, but it's just my common sense telling me that excluding them from providing the board with a proposal that hopefully will be competitive, or if not, then they do it at their risk, seems kind of foolhardy. So my request is that the board consider all qualified RFPs at this time.
Thank you very much for your comment. Very good. I think some of those questions will come back as board members ask questions. So do we have additional questions from members of the board? Marty?
Well, actually, my question was a point of clarification from the MECOS. Was I'm familiar with Veolia Transportation, and I wondered if, in fact, they own the transit system or they're merely operating it. Generally, they operate under contract in America with transit systems.
Why don't you ask Eric to get an answer to that question
Okay, Eric,
for you?
Can I get an answer to that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Other questions from members of the agency? I think it would be appropriate for us to answer the question about additional public input on the RFP. Eric, so if you can handle that, and then we'll invite you and staff to comment on why 3 and not 4.
Okay.
If you would.
Yeah, our schedule calls for our next board meeting on June the 30th, and part of that board meeting would be to present to you the draft request for proposals that would be going out to the selected 3 firms. And I would presume it's an open meeting, so at that time we could certainly receive comment from interested members of the public. So that's our schedule.
All right. And if members of the public want to get in touch with you, would that be acceptable if they want to get some input
Absolutely,
prior to
through
that
me,
meeting?
or through Jim Yost, who's really handling all the details and relationships relative to the DBO procurement.
Very good.
So the first light of day, the first light of day for the actual RFP that will be bid on by the firms that we approve going forward will be in the agenda packet for the June 30 meeting?
Yes, correct. And also at that time, we'll have the report from Doctors Georgia Blonigus and Ed Schroeder in terms of their review of the process from a treatment and facility standpoint.
Right.
It would be also on June the 30th. And just to look a little bit farther ahead, subsequent to that, we would be sending the draft RFP to the selected 3 firms and working with them and getting their input back as to what they thought might be enhance that request for proposal. And the intent is that in September, I believe it's September, we would be going back to them with the final request for proposal. So there'll probably be one other opportunity before you with the final RFP, and let you know what changes transpired subsequent to the draft RFP.
And are we still on that question? Or
Not on RFP, but on the second question you asked.
Okay. Yeah, let's take that one now.
Having to do with a fourth entity that we would issue a RFP to, what's the drawback in asking for a fourth proposal?
The intent when we first started on the whole process, and when we decided on the DBO and then decided to go forward with the request for qualifications, we'd always indicated that we would narrow down the shortlist to 3 firms. And it was felt that, and we're really pleased with the response. We've gotten top-notch firms from all 5 teams. But the intent was to narrow down to 3 because we felt that it would be asking too much of all the firms. This is going to cost them each a lot of money. And it was felt that we could narrow it down on qualifications, and that based on qualification, we felt we wanted to deal with just the top 3 and not be influenced later on in dealing with more than that. We wanted to first go by what we thought were the top qualified firms. And we didn't want to have more than 3 because we know it costs a lot, and we felt that anybody beyond the final 3 would be at a disadvantage off the bat from a qualification standpoint based on the detailed review that was undertaken by our team, which was very extensive. And I'm not sure if Jerry Gilbert would like to, or Jim would like to add anything to that.
I'll add a little bit to that. What you have to realize is to go through now the RFP and submit a proposal to us is going to cost these guys a lot of money. That's a given. But on the other hand, it's going to cost the water agency a lot of money to review these. Just imagine each one of these teams is going to prepare a 35% design on the entire project. We have to review all that, go through it in detail. They're going to give us reams of information about their costs and all the performance of their facilities. It's a tremendous amount of work to review each one of these. So from fairness to the folks that competed thus far, they understood all along that we were going to shortlist to 3, and our agency budget assumes that we're going to be reviewing 3, and it would have to go up if we add a 4th.
What would be the incidental cost for because I understand that if they choose to want to bear the cost, that's their choice. But what we have to be concerned about is our cost. So my question is, what would you determine the incidental cost would be for a 4th submittal in the review by our teams?
Well, I don't know. It would basically take, we have laid out a process where we will meet with each of these teams now 3 times and spend about a day with each of the 3 of them 3 times. So, basically it'd add about a third more cost to that element of the project.
If I could add to that, and Jim, I think I'm interpreting your budget properly, but in the budget scope that you saw earlier today, there are a few line items that all deal with reviewing the submittals, the proposals, and collectively it shows about $900,000 for 3 submittals, so you could estimate another $250,000, $300,000 to add a 4th proposal.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
It's a substantial amount of work.
And then just so that it's clear, the 4th proposer, the 4th entity that would be excluded, Belfour and Beatty, under your criteria of determination, 2 of the areas in which, at least as I read it, that they had the least amount of experience and where you probably rated them lower had to do with the projects that they have participated in. They've been primarily, as I gather, wastewater treatment projects versus surface water treatment facilities.
You want to comment on that, Trey?
Yes, that is correct. And also the operating unit with the Balfour Beatty team, while a good company, has had much significantly less experience in operations than for surface water treatment than the top 3.
Right. Great. Thank you.
I'd like to clarify that a little bit. I know Balfour Beatty because Balfour Beatty worked on the Freeport projects. Both the intake as well as the water treatment plant and pumping stations, and those were water projects. So I want to make sure we clarify that we're
treatment facilities.
We don't have that perception. I think one of the things that was related to me through the Facilities Procurement Committee is in terms of the depth of design build experience here locally was not quite as strong. Is that correct, Jerry?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. But the water, certainly they have a great track record here in the Sacramento area, and I can personally attest to that. So,
Chairman Marble, I have a second question, but if there's no further inquiries on this area, then I'd like to ask that actual third question.
Okay,
that would be here.
do it.
And it has to do with RFP language on ethical consideration. Is there a clause, Mr. Shanahan, that we anticipate within the RFP or the final documents that deals with ethical considerations?
At this point, no, I don't believe so. I made a note to check with Eric Peterson, the attorney who's taken the lead on that process, and see what he's done in other similar DBO projects across the country. But currently, I don't believe that's included. If anybody else on agency staff can correct me, I'd appreciate it, but I don't think it's included.
We could fine language, I'm certain, and has been written within other contracts.
Yes, and that's, I think, a good question, is we'll ask Mr. Peterson what he's seen in similar, situations in other communities in DBO proceedings.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just want to follow up on the process with the draft RFP and its finalization. So as I understand that it's a June draft, into the month here, be a draft.
June 30th is when we're planning our next board meeting, and that would be another special board meeting, just to keep the program.
And it is a draft.
Okay.
And it is a
then in
draft.
September, is there another meeting to consider the final
We
document?
have, at this point in time, we haven't set a special meeting. We're shooting for September. It is in September, and we can certainly call another special board meeting for you to, we want you to be comfortable with that, and so we certainly could have a meeting, and that would be obviously open to the public. And we would, at that point in time, definitely relate to you the changes, specific changes that occurred from the time of the draft to the actual final. Because it's going to probably include a number of things, not just technical, but liability, other legal terms, contractual terms, guarantees, that type of thing. So it's going to be considerable. Perhaps it could be considerable changes.
So that your sense is that would necessitate another board discussion?
I think you would appreciate learning of those changes. It's a big commitment that's going to take place, and that you feel comfortable of what is going to be put out there and people are responding to.
And when it's released, it'd probably come in October or something, be released?
We're shooting for September.
Release it after that board action.
Our next regular scheduled board meeting would be in July, and then the next one wouldn't be until October. So we would have to call special meetings between July and October to deal with anything associated with this process.
And how long for the firms to, or the teams to respond?
At this point in time, it's around April. We're anticipating receiving the proposals back.
Thank you.
Director Cravoza?
Thanks. But even once the final RFP comes out, there's still a fairly fluid period of time between October and April, right? As we learn things, there's, just as Jim was saying, this is a process of the firms putting in their proposals, but it's almost a negotiation with each of the groups over time.
Just like it was pointed out to you, between the time we issued the request for qualifications and the time we actually received them, there were addendums and changes to that initial document. And that could certainly take place between the issuance of the final request for proposal, between that time and the time we actually received the proposals back.
Yeah. It's obviously in our interest to get as final as we possibly can by mid-September.
And to be as fair as possible.
As fair as possible, no question. We're good.
All right.
Two other things. But
go ahead.
Actually, and I should have asked it earlier while Stephen was on the line of 3 or 4, but we've really telegraphed, since mid-fall or even earlier, that we were headed toward this down select to 3 at this point in time. Isn't that, is that fair to say?
Right. We've been very consistent in that statement, yes.
Right. So I don't think there should be any surprise now that we're getting down to 3.
Right. And like we indicated, Jerry indicated, all these firms are very well qualified, world-class firms and teams, and it's very tight. And sometimes there's just a little bit of difference, occurs between them, and that's where you have to make the cut. So.
Yeah. So, I am very sympathetic to the, why not get bids from everybody view, but I do think in this situation, this is such a complex contract, and it is something we're going to be negotiating out with, the number of bidders, that, there does have to be some cut at some point in time to limit staff time and make sure we're really focusing on the folks that have the highest probability of being successful in the end. Good. And then I'm certainly interested in seeing the local content with respect to our building trades represented in the RFP that we'll have coming before us in June. And as I recall from past staff reports, there are a couple other areas where, it's not going to be clear whether or not we're actually going to put, a bid spec in the RFP or not, and how much weight we're going to give to those bid specs. So I think I'm still expecting to see that in June, which is, exactly what the criteria are going to be and what the weight is going to be given to each of the criteria. And I guess I'm just asking you, Eric, to confirm that that continues to be the case. I think it is going to be a big meeting for us. And I expect there may even be some things that are above the line and below the line where we've got to decide, what's going to be above and what's going to be below, and maybe the weighting as well.
Well, since you asked that question, maybe, Jim, could you just give a quick, very synopsis, some of the key points, key major categories? Or Jerry? Yeah.
Categories
in terms of criteria we'd be looking at.
Well,
just real quick.
They would be similar to the ones you saw for the RFQ, redone. We're going to do a from scratch review of qualifications, plus the competitive financial package, which includes both capital costs and operating costs, which we'll do a life cycle cost analysis of. And the balance between those two has yet to be decided, and that'll be one of the things we'd like to talk with you about. I'd like to add just one thing. It seems to me that as the project evolves, starting with the 30th, we'll start to identify those issues where the board would like to be involved and on a continuing basis. And then we can structure the meetings going down the pike to achieve that kind of involvement.
Any other questions? Director Doty?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two suggestions. First of all, I would fully support the idea of putting some language in the RFP about ethical issues, ethical considerations. And also, since our ratepayers are going to be spending a lot of money over a period of time here, I'd like to see this project benefit our local labor pool. I have no idea how big that should be, but I'd like to see language in the RFP also for that. And I don't want it to be a should. I want it to be a shall endeavor. I'm sorry? It should be on. I'd like it to be a shall endeavor. I don't want it to be a should. I think that we need to see some serious effort to employ people in this area and let this project benefit people directly before we're actually pumping water.
Yes.
Director Doty said.
Yes, please.
From the outset, that issue has been included in the RFQ, and we asked the proposers to indicate to us what kind of efforts they're going to make to do that. We intend to include the same thing in the RFP, and we'll work out a program that achieves the maximum amount of local participation.
I'm not only interested in effort, I'm interested in result.
We got the message loud and clear.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ben? Okay. You have another question? All right. I think we need a motion then to move ahead. I think for me, all of the questions have been answered that I had. So, anybody like to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll move that we accept staff's recommendation and release the RFP to the 3 top recommended firms or groups of firms.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion?
Oh, with the changes we've recommended.
Okay.
I would just ask if we had a situation once we issued the RFP where one of our selected 3 bidders chose not to bid based upon the criteria we put out or for any other reason, I would assume that we would then move Balfour and Beatty into the number 3 position. Is that fair? Because I think we do want 3 in that final
yes,
group.
in discussing it with the Facilities Procurement Committee, that was the intent. Everybody's so close. It was felt, just as you said, Director Corvoza, that if one were to drop out for whatever reason, that we certainly would invite the 4th ranked firm, Balfour Beatty, to join.
Okay.
The short list.
I'm good with that.
The backup.
Yeah.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, and thank you, members of the public, for your comments. Much appreciated. Item 7.
Item 7 pertains to our agreement with RD 2035, and it relates to time commitments relative to proceeding ahead with our agreement. In the agreement, it indicates that by June the 1st, they should have demonstrated to us that they are recipients of grants from the Bureau of Reclamation for 100% design of the intake. There was
What was that date?
June 1st.
Okay.
And we were concerned about that, and they did come up with a letter that we did receive, which sort of goes halfway to indicating that the Bureau, and it is a Bureau of Reclamation letter, which indicates that their intent is to fund it, but it's not a formal authorization and commitment of that money. And from a legal standpoint, I'd like to turn it over to Dick to give you what that means to us.
The language in the contract, let me back up first of all. The joint intake agreement has a series of important milestones and contract off-ramps where if the joint intake agreement doesn't go as anticipated, as scheduled, and as we hope for with grant funding, then the agency has various opportunities to withdraw from that contract and pursue other intake opportunities. The first big milestone date just passed was June 1. The contract language is finally secured grant funding for 100% design. Based on the Bureau correspondence we've seen to date, we've not seen a demonstration of finally secured. However, we have seen a demonstration of very good progress. It's being the funds are being processed at a staff level, and the Bureau is telling us that the funds should be available in late July or early August, which is still consistent with our project schedule. So we're not doing anything about the June 1 deadline having come and passed. We're going to monitor the receipt of the funds, but we have sent a letter to RD 2035 informing them that we're sort of reserving this issue in place and reserving our right to assert they've missed the June 1 deadline if the promised schedule laid out by the Bureau in its latest letter doesn't hold through and we find ourselves in, deep into August or September with no funding. At some point, we will need to make a very difficult call if the money doesn't show up in that promised schedule. So it's just we just want to let you know that June 1 deadline came and went, and we're monitoring it. Any questions?
No. All right. That's an informational item. We'll move to item 8, the amendment number 1 to Kim Floyd Communications Agreement.
Yes, what's before you is a request for you to review and look at and approve, if you agree, a contract for this coming fiscal year for Kim Floyd Communications to allow Kim to continue the work that she has been doing as our public outreach manager. And it is for a total of $140,000 for this fiscal year.
All right. Questions?
Is that shown in the budget we received?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, thanks. Thank you.
I'll move
Good.
it.
Okay.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded.
I said I would move it. I move approval.
All right.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you had moved it. I'm
It has
sorry.
now been
My hearing's
formally
a little-
moved
And seconded.
and seconded.
It was very silent moving.
Any,
Thank you,
He
Marty.
twitched, that was
I neglected to ask for public comment on the matter. Seeing none, any comment from the board? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move to item 9, task order number 5.
Task order number 5 is to approve work for West Yost to provide assistance to us as our program manager and engineering, provide engineering services for this coming fiscal year, as they have been doing this past year. It's identified as task order number 5 to be consistent with what we have been doing. What is changed is we're going on a year-to-year basis, and so this would be on a fiscal year basis, and at the end of June 30th before the end of June 30th next year, if we want to proceed again with West Yost, we would have would probably be calling it task order number 6. So we felt that was the better way to do it from a program management standpoint, and given the services that they're doing now, and with where we are in the program. It correlates very nicely with the sequencing of our design, build, operate schedule. And so this is for this fiscal year. It's for $5.449 million, and includes a variety of services. As I mentioned before, it's not just program management, but engineering services associated with the pipeline, as well as for our portion of the regional intake, as well as providing assistance in leadership in areas such as property acquisition, and assisting with public outreach in terms of providing information. Also involved in assisting, providing assistance, technical assistance to our environmental and permitting activities as well, to mention a few. And as well as we talked about earlier, looking to the future in terms of our, looking at our summer water supply and those issues as well.
Any questions from members of the board?
Yes. Chairman Marble, relating to the item that's been brought up several times today, and Director England has read the language. In the subtask 4.6.7, there are 4 bullet points. 2 of the bullet points would be, in my opinion, also not really related to engineering. It is more from the medical perspective, and that is the first 2 bullet points, the results of the review of reporting of actions taken by other water suppliers in California when faced with this issue. And the second bullet point is documentation of the benefits and constraints of fluoridation and relating these to DWWSP supply conditions, including definition of likely fluoridation injection rate. The last part does. The prior part doesn't. It's more along the lines of, I think, what the cities should be doing in determining whether the cities want to go ahead with fluoridation or not. And I think the legal aspect and some of the medical aspects of it are up to the cities. The engineering aspects of it are up to this board. And I know it is a small line item in comparison to the Task Order 5 extension, and but I know that there is some charge of that $28,000 that's related to those first 2 bullet points. So I would suggest, fellow members, that we ask that those 2 first bullet points be deleted out of the subtask 4.6.7.
You want to comment on that, Jim or Eric?
I'll start real quick, and Jim can definitely add on. That's a good catch. I mean, I can see how that could be interpreted, and the intent was definitely not necessarily the benefits. I know the constraints were a concern relative to engineering facilities, the constraints of coordinating the surface water with groundwater. But the benefits is not a good engineering term for what we're trying to achieve. It was looking at the issues associated conceptually with integrating that activity into the 2 distribution systems.
I basically agree with Eric. Item number 1, I think, was to look at what other folks have done and just to get information on facilities they've used and so forth, and that's what we would do in 1, but we don't need to document the benefits and constraints to be able to do our work, so I'd be happy to take that out, and it would reduce our cost for that by some amount. I'd be willing to agree to reduce it by a certain amount, whatever you think is fair.
Great.
I would just say I echo what Stephen has said, and I think we're all on the same page on that. I think I'd make 2 points. I mean, the first, we've already been there, which is that, we want the water agency to do the work now so that the cities, if they decide to go forward, have the basic knowledge of cost and engineering and so on, so that the city decision-making can be, first class, and we aren't guessing at the city level of what it's going to cost and whether it's technically feasible and, how complex the mixing would be and those kinds of things. So all of those engineering questions that the cities may have are ones that we should, try to some extent pre-answer. I think the only slight qualification I would have to what Stephen has said is I want to leave the door open a little bit that if cities did decide that through this body they wanted to do some joint work that went beyond the engineering, I would be open to that, but that's down the road, and that has to come from the cities saying, Clean Water Agency, would you do this, coordinating, with the existing experts and doing it in a unified way, and that's a different request for a different time, and only after the cities might make that request. And Stephen, I think we're probably on the same page on that.
We are, and,
yeah.
and I would, along the lines that was asked, and I think we need to know, because our city councils are going to deal with this probably not on the same timeline. It actually would be nice if we could coordinate, the months in which we do it so that we actually have an answer in a quick time frame. But more importantly, when might this information be available? Because that will be one of the determinants that I think would be important for the councils to have its ability to be able to disseminate to its members. But I come back to our councils have some input and need some of that engineering information, but I think more importantly, we have other considerations that will probably, in my mind, outweigh the engineering considerations far more than the cost.
Yeah, so I would just add, I have just two comments I would add. Number one, I think in terms of investigating what other communities have done, I think we can get that done for free by members of the California Dental Association. There are groups that do this, so I'd like that taken out because I think we can get it at no cost. And secondly, I think that we need to have it clearly stated, as has been said by this agency board, that our whatever study that we engage West Yost to conduct is strictly relating to engineering feasibility costs and making sure that we have adequately taken care of any future needs should it be approved by cities and should it be shown to be done in a cost-effective way. And I assume that also means that you will investigate the engineering component of having well water being mixed in with a common source for surface water. I think that to me is part of the engineering component that needs to be addressed. And medical and other benefits are done in another venue and will be considered. So does that meet? Anybody want to add to that? Yes, Don?
And I think it's on point. I think it's clear enough that the first bullet is not necessary in this project. I agree with the board comments on that. The second one I think might be inartfully worded, and where it reads documentation of the benefits and constraints. I think that phrase is related to getting into the second part of the sentence about supply conditions and likely fluoridation injection rates. Mm-hmm. And it may be that if it was worded something along the lines of documentation of the alternatives for technical delivery systems, then you get, I think that's what your intent is in the wording.
Yeah, I think, sounds like good wording to me.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. I think what you're trying to do with the study is answer and just specify what the questions are you're answering. Can we do it? And what does it cost to do it? And then take that information to the cities. I'm sure they'd be glad to have that. And then if they decide to do it, this is the price tag, and this is what it takes for us to be able to do it. Because then that limits you as to what this project really is about.
Very good. We have yes.
And just for clarification on the first bullet point, where they talk about reporting of actions taken by other, and you were talking about perhaps getting that free through the Dental Association. I think one of the focal points of this is looking and seeing what types of injection equipment, what kinds of storage, transport that other agencies have used in doing this would be the engineering side of that question. And so I'm not sure that the dental associations are going to be able to answer that. And so I would request that maybe you think about leaving that bullet point in with the instructions to constrain that to engineering aspects
Yeah.
of that.
I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure we're not duplicating work that's been done, and I don't even know, they may have done some of that technical work already. I just don't know. But we'll assume that you'll check on that and use every cost-saving measure. And in terms of the overall amount here, I think the direction from the agency would be that you reduce it by what you've understood us to have said, and that we not engage any additional costs than what we need to.
Just to go a little bit further, though, so we're only on the engineering side here completely, but I'd like to know, I guess, from staff, given the budget that is here, how deep we plan to go into the engineering aspects of each community, because there's the stuff that may or may not happen at the treatment plant. Then there's how this surface water, groundwater, seasonal mix feasibility engineering happens at the city level, and I guess my sense right now was we were just dealing with the former, which is clearly the CWA's world, and not necessarily the latter, which might be more the responsibility of each jurisdiction. But I don't know that, and so I might as well clarify that now.
That's a good question. It definitely is what we can do from a regional level, but that really plays into what the systems are for individually for both the cities of Davis and Woodland. And they're both a little bit different, and the well locations and how frequently the wells would run versus the surface water, and the distribution system hydraulics, and we're going to take into consideration this is all conceptually. We're not going to do that work for the cities, but we'll take work, as I understand, is ongoing for both cities in looking at their distribution systems and the hydraulics to factor that into this conceptual study, and maybe. Oh, Jim might add more, I'm sure, and maybe Greg and Bob could add for their respective cities.
I would just clarify a little bit on what Eric said. We had not intended to get into the individual cities' systems and speak to what they would have to do to inject
feasibility-wise, you'll look at that. Is it even feasible to tie in wells to the overall system? Or were you not? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
Well, clearly there's a need for each community to assess what the local implications are, and I can't recall off the top of my head what Woodland is planning on doing as far as their long-term well system. Davis has always envisioned we'd be keeping our 6 deep aquifer wells to deal with our peak summer period. So if it was a decision of the city to consider fluoride, we would need to assess what the implications were for our 6 wells that could all be running, and how do we fluoride at each site with the cost. There may be slightly different dosage requirements because of the constituents in the water supply. There are differences between Woodland's groundwater and Davis's. We wouldn't necessarily need to know all those details, but to have a number for the respective councils to factor in what does that mean locally, I think my preference would be to have West Yost perform that function at that level for each city. And then the cities, if there was value in going further, would look into the individual chemistry at each well, and that's a refinement that could come later.
All right.
That's great. That's all I need to know.
Okay. We have a motion to, do we have any public comment on this item? Yes, ma'am? I believe it's Barbara.
Yes, Barbara King. I'm going to have to go watch the video. I had stepped outside, and here we're back on, this is from the periodic table of charts, F word again, fluoride. Sorry, I like that joke. how, you had a little bit here. Were you talking about fluoride a lot when I was out? There's a possibility I hear here of possibly fluoridating the 6 deep aquifer wells. That's under consideration? I can't ask questions.
They're talking about feasibility.
Feasibility.
Engineering, this is related to engineering.
So it's the surface water and the well water, can you link them?
It's just engineering feasibility.
I mean, I think what we're just doing is making consistent in this West Yost contract exactly the part of the agenda that
So you're bringing
we're
forward the
talking-
stuff from previous?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we're kind of clarifying in this item that that's consistent with what went on earlier in the meeting, so I think that's all.
Okay, good, thank you.
That's helpful, so.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. All right, we have a motion.
Yeah, I'll move the item.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Board member comments?
I have nothing.
Mr. England? Doty? Stephen? Director Saylor? Any board member comments? Director Cravoza?
None, thank you.
You're doing a great job.
I will make 2 comments. One is a reminder to our important public that tomorrow night in Woodland and Thursday night here in Davis at 6:30 will be an incredibly important meeting related to an update on the water agency. Eric Mishi will be there giving a presentation, as will staff members from each of the communities and board members from the agency board. And a lot of effort has gone into these public meetings. We encourage every interested public member to come and participate. 6:30, the details are posted on the agency website, and I believe on the city websites as well. Also, I neglected in the item 6 related to the firms that had participated in this process, and I know a number of them have left, but I think we owe a vote of appreciation to the 2 firms that were not selected, who were good firms, and we know a lot of effort and energy goes into submitting even an RFQ like was done. And on behalf of the board, I think we want to thank them and let them know of our appreciation for participating in the process, and we look forward to working actively with the other 3 firms.
Chair Marble?
Yes.
Along those lines, do we think we owe it to Balfour Beatty to let them know that they're in the bullpen, their potential alternate
I'm sure
position?
Eric will do that. Yeah. Good comment. Okay, with that, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you,
Move adjourned.
everyone. Oh, we do have to, well, let's motion it first. You moved it? Anybody second it?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, meeting is adjourned.
What's it?